in the long history of the world.
All right, so we're diving into JFK today. You've handed us a huge stack of stuff on John F. Kennedy.
We've got a lot to unpack.
It seems like you really want to get past the glamorous facade and figure out what made the man tick.
Definitely. There's a lot more to him than meets the eye.
Which that was more interesting, right?
Absolutely.
So, where should we even start with someone like JFK? I mean, youngest president ever elected, right?
Yeah, 43 years old. Can you imagine that happening today?
It's crazy. I mean, nowadays...
Back then, people expected a certain, I don't know, gravitas from their leaders.
Experience.
Yeah.
Someone who'd, seen it all.
Exactly. And JFK just kind of blew that out of the water.
He had this youthful energy that people really responded to, right?
Totally. His whole new frontier idea, that was all about a fresh start, a new era.
Optimism, looking to the future, yeah.
It was infectious, you know.
But we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the scandals, right? JFK's personal life is a big part of his story.
Yeah, it's definitely there. And it's important to acknowledge, for sure.
The affairs, the Marilyn Monroe connection, it's hard to separate that from his image, even now.
It's tricky, right? Because on the one hand, presidential scandals are nothing new. But how we view public and private lives has changed so much.
Back then, it was all, hushed up behind closed doors.
Exactly. The media worked differently, and there was, I don't know, a different understanding of what went on in a politician's personal life.
More forgiving, maybe.
Perhaps. The point is, we have to be careful judging the past by today's standards.
Context is everything, right? It makes you realize history's never black and white.
Never. Speaking of complex, can we talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis for a sec?
Oh, wow, yeah. The world was on the brink of nuclear war. Can you even imagine?
It's unfathomable now, right? But that's where JFK's leadership was really tested.
Under immense pressure, yeah.
And somehow he stayed so calm, so collected.
From what I've read, he really took his time to consider all the angles.
Absolutely. He listened to everyone, weighed the options, and ultimately chose diplomacy over disaster.
That must have taken incredible strength.
It really does make you think about what leadership means in a crisis and the impact of the Cuban Missile Crisis on U.S.-Soviet relations. Huge. We're still feeling the effects today.
It's a lot to wrap your head around. And while all this was happening on the world stage, JFK was also dealing with huge problems here at home.
Right. The civil rights movement was in full swing.
A really tense time in American history, to say the least. And for JFK to come out so strongly in favor of civil rights, I mean, that was a huge risk.
You're telling me he could have alienated a huge chunk of voters, destroyed his career.
So what was it? Genuine belief. Political strategy.
It's hard to say for sure, and honestly, it was probably a bit of both. But whatever his reasons, there's no denying the impact of his actions.
He pushed the civil rights movement forward, no question.
Absolutely. Laid the groundwork for so much progress.
It's amazing how his life intersects with all these major historical events.
His life story is like a crash course in 20th century history.
And we haven't even touched on his World War II experiences. PT boat commander, the rescue mission.
Talk about courage under fire.
Those experiences must have stayed with him.
Absolutely. Shaped his worldview long before he even thought about running for office. You can see those themes of duty, resilience, the fragility of life. They're all over his presidency.
It makes you wonder, how those early experiences influenced his decisions later on.
Absolutely. The past always shapes the present.
And then there's his family. 9 siblings. The Kennedys were, and still are, a force of nature.
They really are, and you're right. They went through so much together, triumphs, tragedies.
Like losing his brother in the war.
A devastating loss for the entire family.
And yet, look what came out of that grief. Eunice Kennedy Shriver founding the Special Olympics. Incredible.
A true testament to the family's commitment to service.
Makes you wonder about their family dynamics, What was it like growing up as a Kennedy? Was there this unspoken pressure to make a difference?
It's fascinating to think about, and we can't forget, on top of everything else, the guy wins a Pulitzer Prize for his book, Profiles in Courage.
That's right. Sometimes it's easy to forget that JFK was a serious intellectual, too.
Right. He wasn't just a charismatic speaker, he was a deep thinker, deeply engaged with the issues. To reduce him to just his charm or his family name would be a huge mistake.
There's always more to the story, isn't there?
Always.
And of course, we can't talk about JFK without talking about his assassination, November 23rd, 1963. It still feels so raw, even after all these years.
It's one of those moments seared into our collective memory, isn't it? The motorcade, Dallas.
And the aftermath of conspiracy theories. It's like we still can't let go of the mystery.
It speaks to the enduring power of what if, right? What if JFK had lived? What would the world be like today?
It's a question that continues to haunt us. So here we have this incredibly complex, charismatic, and ultimately tragic figure. Why do you think, after all this time, we're still so drawn to John F. Kennedy?
That's the big question, isn't it? And honestly, I think there's no easy answer. But I hope maybe this deep dive will give you some food for thought. As you learn more about the man, the myth, the contradictions, does it change how you see him? That's what I'm most curious about.
It definitely has for me. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Be sure to check back next time when we'll